Welcome to episode 5 of Truth and Consequences. I'm your host, Doug Poppa. Shortly, I'll have a news exclusive. Right now, Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, according to documents filed with the Supreme Court of Nevada, is currently under investigation by the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline for alleged violations of the Nevada Judicial Code and also for alleged criminal conduct, including Judge Tobiasson's involvement in alleged purported murder plots. I would suggest that if you're not up to date on this ongoing saga, please review podcast numbers 1, 3, and 4 that are available on the Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa YouTube channel. The Las Vegas media has not reported on the story as of this date, so follow me on my YouTube channel, Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. I recently received some new information that further supports my contention that the 2016 unsolved Las Vegas Land Kaufman double homicide was compromised from the start by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detective Jared Grimmett and Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. In the first hour of this podcast, you will hear from Connie Land, whose daughter Sydney was one of the victims in the double homicide. In the last hour, you will hear the interview I gave to the investigator for the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline earlier this year concerning my contact with Judge Tobiasson and why I agreed to do that voluntary interview. Right now, here is my interview with Connie Land that I recorded last night. Okay, I'm on the line with Connie Land. Connie, you received a rather interesting and kind of troubling message from one of Sydney's friends. Can you tell me what happened with that?
Yeah, I got a message on Messenger from someone that said he had some information about the homicide, that he had gone to school with Sydney, and asked me to reach out to him. And so I did call him. And what he proceeded to tell me was very disturbing. He had informed me that he was very good friends with Detective Grimmett, Jared Grimmett, who's the detective on the homicide. And he had said that Detective Grimmett's daughter used to date or was involved with Shane Valentine, who is a person of interest. That's so disturbing to me that, that he's all the things that have happened in this case. And now I find out that his daughter's associated with Shane Valentine. And then he went a step further and sent me a text message between him and Detective Grimmett's son, where he said, yeah, his dad said that Shane Valentine didn't commit the murders.
Wow.
So it was concerning to me that he's talking about the homicide to his family. Who else is he talking to the homicide? Well, we know that there's an alleged communication between him and Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. And then we find that his daughter is involved. So I reached out to Homicide and spoke to the sergeant. And
what's his name? What's his name?
Sergeant Fletcher. He's my point of contact now at Homicide. So I sent him an email and I said, can you explain a few things to me? I have learned from a reliable source that Grimmett, and I said his daughter's name, was at some point involved with Shane Valentine.
And what is his daughter's name?
Taylor, I believe.
And what's the son's name?
Tristan Grimmett.
Okay, so this, let me make this straight here, so for people who are listening. So you received a message from one of Sydney's friends who's friends with Detective Jared Grimmett's son, Tristan.
Correct.
Okay,
Correct.
Go on.
And so I reached out to them and I said, I'm very concerned that Shane Valentine had an association with Grimmett. So I numbered him down. I said, 1, did Jared Grimmett ever disclose in the last 3.5 years that his daughter had a relationship or he knew Shane Valentine at any point in the investigation? 2, why is Detective Grimmett talking to his family that Shane Valentine didn't commit the murders? And they referenced, somebody else involved in the homicide also, or may have been involved in the homicide. 3, is this protocol and is this going to damage the case in any way? Now, Grimmett, I've been asking for over 3 years. I did not want Grimmett on the case. I had been told by Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson that she was getting information about the homicide from Jared Grimmett. Jared Grimmett went on national television on Crime Watch Daily and blew all the information about the DNA, that it was in the apartment, which it's an open homicide investigation, and you're going to say that the DNA was a mess and you didn't know what was supposed to be there and what wasn't. You've got his daughter that's involved and, tied with him. You've got him saying that his son, that his, that Shane Valentine didn't do it, and he's talking to his family. So I want to know how many other people Grimmett's running his mouth to about who did this murder and who didn't do the murder.
Okay, let's hang on for a second here. So I just want to get some things clear. So you sent the text messages, you sent the emails to Mike Fletcher, and then you sent those emails to me also.
And I sent it to Detective Dosh also.
Okay, one was on the 8th, and one was on the 9th, and the one on the 8th says, I got over here, I just want to make sure we get this on the record. You're talking to Sergeant Michael Fletcher. You're sending him, well, not talking to him, you send him the email over Metro Homicide. He's the Sergeant of Homicide Bureau. And you're telling him, were you aware Taylor Grimmett was involved with or dated Shane Valentine several years ago? And then you say, did Grimmett disclose at any time that he or his family had any personal involvement with Shane Valentine during any part of this homicide investigation? Then on the 9th, you sent him another email, and you state that I recently received correspondence from a verified source where Grimmett has stated to an individual regarding who committed the murders. Grimmett stated Shane didn't do it. I would like to know, is Shane still a person of interest and or a suspect in this case? And then why is Grimmett still continuing to discuss this case and who did it to third parties? Okay, did you get a response at some time or any point with Sergeant Fletcher?
Yeah, it was about 5 weeks later.
Wow, 5 weeks later?
Yeah, and he called. Oh, I sent him several messages or emails in between that time, and I said, you didn't answer my questions. And he called, and we spoke very briefly, and he said, I spoke to Grimmett, and we do not feel that his daughter's involvement is going to be any issues with this case or the investigation.
Wow.
And I said, well, I think it is. That's a big problem for me. If a criminal defense attorney finds out that his daughter was somehow involved or he didn't disclose at any point, which clearly when Fletcher is saying, I spoke to him and we don't feel that that's a problem, clearly Grimmett didn't ever disclose the relationship or his family's involvement with Shane Valentine at the beginning of the homicide. And I would imagine that would be something that he should have done.
Absolutely.
To maintain the integrity of this case.
Absolutely. Let me say something, Ryan, just from my prior experience as a criminal investigator. What Sergeant Fletcher told you, I don't know how they operate over at Las Vegas Metro Homicide, but that is a bunch of BS, okay? That criminal investigation was compromised the minute Jared Grimmett found out that Shane Valentine was a suspect, and from what we know, based on my investigation, that was immediately after the homicide. Shane Valentine was a suspect in this case, and the police said that. Immediately, at that point, he was also working with Detective Mitchell Dosh. He should have went to his supervisor and said, I have a possible conflict of interest here, because there is no possible, it was a conflict of interest. He should have been removed from investigating this case. But now, from what you're telling me, it sounds like he may not even have told anybody at Metro Homicide, any of the superiors, because of what Fletcher told you. That is, that this case was compromised, Connie, from the start. The minute Jared Grimmett opened his mouth to Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, and I've reported that in many stories and then on 3 podcasts so far, and one that's coming out, it'll be out here, another one. But that homicide investigation was compromised the minute he opened his mouth to Judge Tobias-In. Judge Tobias-In had a personal involvement with Shane Valentine, both in the courtroom, and then she told me she had threatened him through his attorney, and then she went to his house and kicked in his door because Sarah had an involvement with Shane Valentine also. And those were stories. That's not a big secret. I've written stories on that. So now we have one of the homicide investigators working the homicide of your daughter and Neil Kaufman, her boyfriend, 3.5 years still unsolved as of this date. And the homicide investigator's daughter at one point had a relationship of some type that we don't know what the type of relationship was with Shane Valentine. It doesn't matter. That wasn't told to his supervisors. This case was compromised twice. And it's a major issue. That is not standard police protocol in any police department I know of. And I've spoken to homicide commanders and supervisors outside of Metro, and they said that's abhorrent. There's no way that this detective should have remained on the case or had anything to do with it. At the very least, he should have been taken off this and given another case away from this investigation. But to have him continued into this investigation to this day, as far as we know, with all that came out, with him talking to Judge Tobias-In, who, like I said, had an involvement in that case, and now we just found this information out a few months ago, it's far more than troubling. This homicide investigation needs to be taken out of Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. It needs to be handled and looked at by another agency, whether that's the FBI or the Attorney General's office, because they compromised the case. Your daughter's murder investigation has been compromised. That's it in a nutshell. Go ahead, Connie. I didn't mean to get on that spiel.
No, that's okay. I have been asking since the beginning of 2017, I wanted Grimmett off this case. I didn't trust him. I had a bad feeling about him. When Melanie, Andress-Tobiasson, the judge, when I met her in May, she immediately started telling me that it was Grimmett that was providing all the information to her. Mm-hmm. And that was very concerning to me. And every single time I have gone to Internal Affairs, they had the case for less than 36 hours, and they call me back and tell me that there was no wrongdoing by Grimmett.
Well, I did a story on that last year when you told me that, and I'm telling you right now, I'd love to see that Internal Affairs investigative file, because I'm telling you, they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. No. They didn't do an Internal Affairs investigation. They're just blowing smoke on this. That's my opinion. I'd love to see the file on the major investigation. Was Jared Grimmett pulled in? Was he put on a polygraph? Did they interview Judge Tobias-In? Did they get to the bottom of this? No, they didn't do any of that, because I believe they didn't do it. Go ahead, Connie.
It's just one thing after another, after another, after another. And I can't tell you how many emails requesting for Grimmett to be taken off of this case. I've spoken to the lieutenants. I've spoken to the sergeants. I've wanted him off of this case.
What did they tell you?
They're not taking him off the case, because every time I talk to him, he's still on the case.
Okay.
And they work on it when they have time. And so when I asked, and so continuing on the conversation with Sergeant Fletcher, I said, well, isn't that a concern that, I said, not only is he talking to Melanie, the Judge Tobias-In, he's talking to her right out of the gate, immediately after the murders happened. And 3.5 years later, he's talking about this, and his son is saying his dad, Shane didn't do it. And I said, how can he be doing that? He said, it's not uncommon. This was his response. He said, it is not uncommon for police officers or detectives to talk about cases at home.
He told you that?
Yeah, he did.
Okay, let me tell you something right now. I don't know anything about this guy. I'm telling you right now, that is BS. That is BS. I was a cop for 16 years. I worked major investigations. I never went home and told my wife anything about a criminal investigation. I certainly never would tell her details about a double homicide investigation, or anybody for that matter. That is a bunch of nonsense. I'm telling you again, I don't know what's going on over there at Metro Police Homicide Bureau. This is not standard protocol in any police department that I know of. It's not standard procedure. It's an actual disgrace. 3.5 years later, this case is compromised. This case is compromised. It was compromised from the start, the minute Jared Grimmett opened his mouth to Judge Tobias-In. And from a police source, from what I understand, is he continues to this day to talk to Judge Tobias-In. I want to bring up something else real quick, because I don't want to stay too long on the phone, because the podcast that I'm doing is going to be over an hour, but on other topics on this. But on April 27, 2018, you received a text message from Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch, Jared Grimmett's partner. And I want to read this in, because this is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. And from other supervisors that I talked to in homicide bureaus across the country that I read this to, they said they never heard of anything like this before in their life, especially that a homicide detective would send this to the mother of a murdered girl whose murder hasn't been solved. And this is what he said. So many things happened since the murders happened that I've never seen before and I had zero control over. I won't get into them now, but they are well chronicled. Detective Grimmett and I are left to pick up the pieces and work toward a successful outcome despite all the quote-unquote things that have happened along the way. We are not going away. Did he ever tell you what all these things were that compromised this case and the things that he had no control over?
No,
Okay.
he didn't.
Okay.
You know, it was interesting. I spoke to him one time, and there were several, I think it's M13.
MS-13.
The game.
MS-13.
MS-13. Okay,
Right.
it was MS-13. And I hadn't spoken to him in a while. And I said, hey, Detective Dosh, I hope you're doing great. You know, hope you're doing okay. He said, I'm really sorry I haven't responded. We've been really busy with the MS-13 murders. And I think there were 10 or 13 murders in a very, very short period of time here. And I think that it was a multi-agency effort that in taking these down, you know, I don't know if it was the DEA, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, I don't know. There were several agencies that worked in unison in tackling this problem. And he said, it was crazy. He said, that was a walk in the park or a cakewalk compared to the stuff that I'm dealing with in this homicide.
Wow. So I remember that those murders, I believe, this is coming off the top of my head. I don't have the articles in front of me. This was about 2 years ago, and there was about 10 bodies that were found in different locations throughout Las Vegas and the desert areas. Most of them were dismembered, and they were done by the members of the MS-13, and they did lock up the perpetrators of those murders. But he's telling you that investigating 10 murders, dismembered bodies, was
a cakewalk compared to what he's dealing with in my daughter's homicide investigation.
Did you ever ask them what the reason why these murders, your daughter and Neo's murders, are not solved? Did he ever tell you why they're not solved?
No.
Okay. Did he ever?
And I've asked.
Did he ever explain to you why the murders of 10 people who were dismembered by MS-13 was an easier investigation than the investigation of your daughter and Neo's death?
No.
Okay. And one thing I want to bring up too, and I've done multiple stories on this, so it's no big secret. Judge Tobias-In only didn't tell you, and you provided me when I met you in January of 2019, when I first made contact with you, you provided me with all the text messages between yourself and Judge Tobias-In, and I wrote multiple stories on that, and since I've not writing for the Baltimore Post-Examiner anymore, I'm covering this on my podcast, Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. But what I want to bring out here is going back to Detective Dorsch. After Judge Tobias-In, when you disassociated yourself after what you did, when you knew basically she was doing a lot of stuff she shouldn't have done, you gave those text messages and communications with Judge Tobias-In, including the ones with, she mentions Detective Grimmett. You gave all those to him in what, 2017?
Yeah, it was end of October, right around October 22nd, 23rd, 2017.
Okay, so in October of 2017, the Las Vegas Metro Police Department had possession of all the emails that you gave me in reference to Judge Tobias-In for, well, that would have been at least 2-3 years at this point. So he had those. He's a member of the department, so the department had them because he's a detective for the department. Did he ever tell you what he did with those?
No, it was about 2 weeks later, less than 2 weeks later. He introduced me to the Criminal Intelligence Division, 2 detectives in the Criminal Intelligence Division, who would be taking over or handling the Judge Tobias-In issue. And so our communication continued there. But it's really interesting,
and who
Doug,
were those 2 detectives? What were their names?
Mark Gregory and Detective Mike Wilson.
Okay, I don't want to get into, I know what you're talking about, and we're going to do another podcast on that later on. I don't want to get into that whole thing, but I'm concerned on this podcast with the murders. Connie, I'm telling you, and I've told you this many times, and I've said it in stories from day one, that the homicide investigation into Sydney and Neo's death was compromised the minute Jared Grimmett released confidential details and evidentiary details to Judge Tobias-In, who had a personal involvement and her daughter with the suspect in the case. And I don't know the content of their conversations. I do know that Judge Tobias-In told me on the record, and that's in this podcast coming out also, that he provided her with the evidence that showed that Shane Valentine, Dominique Thompson, and Frankie Zappia committed the murders. She even said they executed your daughter and Neo at 12:30 a.m. on October 26th of 2016. And she said that information came from Detective Grimmett, the homicide investigator working the case. And she also told me in emails later on, she actually mentions Grimmett, and that they have all the evidence that showed that those three people committed the murders. And 3.5 years later, nobody's been arrested on this case. You know, I've told this multiple times, Connie. I know what it feels like to have somebody in your family murdered and the case doesn't get solved, because it happened to my family. And it's something that just devastates the family. It stays with you forever. But I can say this right now. Did you ever meet with Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metro Police Department? Have you ever met with him personally?
No, I did call in 2017 because I was very upset as to how the case has been going. And I felt like they were being very negligent. I felt like there was corruption. I mean, I felt like there was corruption right out of the gate. And I can't explain to you why, because I really didn't have a lot of information. But I just felt like things were not right, that they were covering things up, they were being deceitful, and they were being very negligent at the least. And so I called the office of the sheriff to talk to Sheriff Lombardo. I didn't speak to him, but I did speak to, and I can't remember who the sub-sheriff was, and I got a lot of phone calls. They're like, we're going to go through this with a fine-tooth comb. Trust me. I got calls from the sub-sheriff. I got calls from captains and lieutenants and sergeants, and, you know, and they were going to look into everything. Nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened. It's very frustrating. I feel like I'm trying to play by rules and do the right thing by going to internal affairs, talking to superiors, providing information to the detectives, doing what I'm supposed to, and I get chopped off at the knees every time I do something. I can't even really talk to Dosh anymore. I have to go through Sergeant Fletcher. Well, and those are the answers that I get. Sergeant Lusignot, same thing. Okay. You know?
Sergeant Lusignot is the homicide sergeant. He's retired. He's not there anymore. Sergeant Mike Fletcher is the homicide. I got a little background noise there. Okay, what I want to say about when you told Detective Dosh your concerns about Grimmett and gave him those text messages in 2017, did he say anything about Grimmett? What did he tell you?
He didn't say. Oh, what he told me, I told for several months, I told Detective Dosh I didn't trust Grimmett.
And what was his response when you told him that?
He said, "You can trust." He goes, "I trust Detective Dosh I trust Detective Grimmett with my life. You can too."
Okay. Well, yeah, you told me that some time ago, and I got that in this podcast coming out in my notes. I want to highlight that because I'm going to tell you something right now. I don't know what Dosh knew about what Grimmett was doing with Judge Tobias-In. Hopefully, somewhere down the road, we'll get the truth on this whole mess, because that's what it is. It's a stinking, filthy, dirty mess. But if I found out that my partner that I'm working a homicide investigation with is talking to anybody, let alone a judge, anybody, I don't care who it is, and releasing information about the investigation that we're conducting together to a third party that has no business and no interest at all getting that information, she was wrong to ask him, and he was just as wrong to give it. There was going to be a serious problem. So I don't know what went on with Dosh and Grimmett, but I'm telling you, nothing that happened in this case from the start is right and makes any sense, including, and I'm highlighting here in this podcast, is 2 days after the crime scene was cleared. That's Sydney's apartment where she was living with Neo, and she was on the lease. Her name was on the lease. your husband, Steve, who's a Clark County firefighter slash paramedic, went into the apartment to get some of Sydney's things into the same blood-stained room where Sydney was shot in the head. And he finds evidence in that room, a jar with love letters from Neo's former girlfriend, a pay stub on the floor with another guy's name on it, and some other stuff that was left behind by the crime scene analyst and the police that were in that apartment. I've never heard of anything like that before. Now, he picked that stuff up, he told me, and I did a story in this last year, and I'm highlighting again in this podcast coming out in the next day or two. And he met with Jared Grimmett and said, I think this is evidence you guys left behind. I've never heard of this before, Connie. Everything at a crime scene you take. Everything. Because once you leave the crime scene, you don't have a chance to go back and get it. Because you have no idea doing an investigation either 2 days later, 2 weeks later, or 2 years later, that what information may be pertinent. Certainly, love letters from the victim's former girlfriend, of course that would be important, because nobody's ruled out as a suspect in a homicide until a homicide is solved. There's no such thing as wasting your time looking into anything. You look into everything, you turn over every stone. And now you have a pay stub with another guy's name on it, and I haven't verified this, but I heard the name on that stub could be the son of another cop. This case is so freaking disturbing. I don't want to stay on.
When I asked Detective Dosh, I asked him recently, I said, why, when you've got how many crime scene analysts, detectives, vice detective, you had all sorts of different people going in and out of that apartment. Why would they have left that in the apartment? To me, those were pretty critical pieces of information. And he said, well, if we didn't need it, we wouldn't have taken it.
Okay, let me tell you something. I don't make fun of this because there's nothing funny about, and I've been doing this investigation on these murders for almost 2 years now. Okay, there's nothing funny about it. That is the most ignorant, deplorable statement I've ever heard from a homicide detective. He needs to go back to Homicide 101. You take everything. You don't look at stuff and say, hey, we're not going to take this. It doesn't look right, especially love letters from the guy's former girlfriend, a pay stub with somebody's name on it. How do you know that pay stub didn't fall out of the killer's pocket? I mean, that is the most, Connie, and I hate to say it because I know how passionate you are about wanting to get your daughter's killers caught, okay? But it's so disheartening to me as a former cop and former criminal investigator that every time I dig into this from the start, it's one more thing that at the very, very least, it's incompetence and negligence, and God knows what it could be at the worst. I've never heard of anything like this. I've never heard the statements that come out of some of these detectives and supervisors' mouth about an unsolved 3.5-year double homicide. I've never seen anything like this before. And it's not only me. When I told you several times, I express my opinion in the stories that I wrote and even on these podcasts based on my experience. But I always talk to other cops and federal agents that I work with that I knew years ago, and they read my stories, and they told me the same thing. This homicide investigation needs to be pulled from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. It's compromised. They compromised it. They made a mess out of this. No matter whoever gets charged in this case, it's going to be a disaster when it goes to discovery. It needs to go away and either somehow get it into federal jurisdiction or the Attorney General's office, criminal division in Nevada. But there's no way that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department can work on this case anymore. They compromise it. It's been compromised.
Well, how do you think I feel? I've got detectives that are not doing their job. I've got how many mistakes all along the way from before the murders even happened. Them not pulling out the bullet on October 8th and shutting the case down 3 days after, saying insufficient evidence for prosecution.
While we're talking on the phone, I want to say something about that because this conversation is going into the podcast. That what happened on October 8th was a disgrace. Just another thing in this whole police procedure or unprocedure that Las Vegas Metro has been doing. Shane Valentine shot into Neo Kaufman's mother's house while her, the grandmother, and some kids were in the house. The crime scene investigators, and I wrote a story on this, the crime scene investigators go out with the first detective there, patrol detective, whatever they're called, the initial detective, and she takes the boulder that he supposedly threw through the window or something, and she takes pieces of his car because he tried to ram into the garage door, but they don't take the bullet out of the ceiling in the bedroom that went through the window of Neil Kaufman's mother's bedroom. And, you know, and I heard that the mother may have said that she thought they said it's too much work or it's too hard. Let me tell you something, okay? I forgot for a second that Doug Poppa is a former criminal investigator. So I talked to current and former LVMPD, Las Vegas Metro cops that I knew, and cops from other jurisdictions, just to say, am I in the twilight zone? And they all said what I knew was going to be the correct answer is, of course you take the bullet out of the ceiling. Of course you do. Because what good is not taking the bullet out of the ceiling in a shooting into an occupied dwelling if an hour or the next day or 2 days later or a week you stop a suspect and he has the weapon? Now you need the bullet to match the bullet to the weapon. You have a weapon which may have been used, but you don't have the bullet. Now you got to go back, and now you've lost chain of custody. So why that bullet didn't come out of the house on the night of October 8th is just unbelievable to me. And I remember when I did the story also, I obtained the grand jury when they were indicting Shane Valentine for shooting into the occupied dwelling, which is the reason why he's in jail for. And nobody's been charged in the double homicides to this day. I read the grand jury testimony, obtained it from the court, and what I also found disturbing was when Grimmett testified, Detective Dorsch testified, and the crime scene analyst testified. And when she was on the stand, the prosecutor, I think it was Pamela Weckersley from the Clark County District Attorney's Office, she asked her, did you take the bullet out? She says no. And she goes on to another question. Then at the end, one of the jurors asks it again and says, so you didn't take the bullet out? She says no. And they're talking about the boulder that she took and the pieces of the car. They got them in California, and the car had the damage on it, and that's how they made the arrest, which was a good job by Detective Dorsch and Grimmett, if he was involved in this, is to piece that together after the murders. And then Dorsch had gone back in, after the murders and retrieved the bullet out of the house, most likely to see if they could match to the bullets that were found in Sydney's and Neo's head or where they exited the wall. And obviously, since nobody's been arrested, I can assume, and I may be wrong in this, is that bullet did match, because that would have matched the Shane Valentine shot in the house, and the bullet matches the bullets in the victims in the murder, and then you have a case. But since nobody's arrested, I can only assume that the bullets didn't match. But what got me is the prosecutor never asked her, why didn't you take the bullet out? I have the transcripts. I did the story on it last year, and which I found completely bizarre, because that would have been the first thing I would have asked after the first question is, did you retrieve the bullet out of the ceiling? She said no. She goes on to a totally different question to get off the subject. I would have said, well, the crime scene analyst, I think her name was Guerrero, why didn't you take the bullet out of the ceiling? Why? Did somebody tell you not to take the bullet out? Were you too lazy to take it out? Is that proper procedure to leave the most crucial piece of evidence in a house and then leave in a shooting into an occupied dwelling? Connie, there's a lot of stuff that went on in this case. Just in closing, if you want to say some stuff, but I want to keep this any longer because the podcast itself is going to be over an hour. Just so you know, I'm putting in the podcast. Well, maybe the readers don't know if they haven't followed the last 3 podcasts that I did, and those would have been podcast numbers 1, 3, and 4. Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa YouTube channel. These are all companion stories. But Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, who we've been discussing here, according to documents that were filed with the Supreme Court of Nevada within the last week or two, is currently under investigation by the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline for alleged violations of the Nevada Judicial Code and also for alleged criminal conduct, including Judge Tobias-In's involvement in alleged purported murder plots. My thing that I have right now with this whole thing is, if she was a police officer and had those allegations pending against her during an active investigation, she would be suspended pending investigation. But I can't for the life of me realize why Judge Tobias-In is still on the bench because she has access to court records, computer records. If she's under investigation, it says in the court documents, and I did this on podcast, I think the second or third podcast I did on this, for alleged criminal conduct, which we don't know because all those records are sealed, including Judge Tobias-In's involvement in alleged purported murder plots. The rest of that is also sealed, so we don't know what purported murder plots the commission is talking about. Now, let me just explain something. I think you asked me this question the other day, or I got a phone call from somebody. The Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline is not a law enforcement agency, as far as I know. It's an administrative agency that enforces the judicial code for judges. And judges in this state are elected. So Judge Tobias-In is an elected public official, a sitting judge. I don't know why at this time she is not under suspension pending investigation while she's being investigated for criminal conduct. And what we don't know also is, since the commission are not law enforcement agency, it's not a law enforcement agency, if they have these allegations of criminal conduct, including these purported murder plots, which is about as worse as you can get short of committing murder, alleged purported murder plots, we don't know what law enforcement agency is involved with the commission in this. Is it the Las Vegas Metro Police Department? Is it the Investigation Attorney General's office? Or is it the FBI? Because the FBI did have somewhat of an investigation going on with Judge Tobias-In. And I mentioned that in the other podcast because after Judge Tobias-In's interview was aired on KLAS TV in April of 2018, the next day you told me, and I did a story on this, that FBI agent Vinita Pandey called you up the very next day and wanted the phone that you were communicating with Judge Tobias-In, and you did ring him down, and the FBI had possession of those for several months. So I wanted to get that in because some of this is mentioned in the podcast, and I have some slideshows of stuff that are going in. So I just wanted people to understand what we're talking about here. Okay, anything else you want to say? Because we're going to do a bigger podcast down the road, me and you talking about this whole thing, because the podcast that's coming out tonight or tomorrow, and today is Tuesday, June 23rd, is very important because there's a lot of stuff in here about a lot of things that have been bothering me and stuff that I covered in the stories that I wrote that I'm now got follow-up information as this information that you just told me, which is basically breaking news. Now, one more thing before I go, Connie. Can you understand or don't understand why you've been to the Las Vegas media. Why haven't they reported on any of this stuff? What's so funny?
It's banging my head against a wall. It's banging my head against the wall.
Now let me say something, okay? Let me say something. They've reported on the anniversaries that you had the banners up and stuff like that, but they never got into what's really going on in this case. And I got tons of emails since I started doing these stories on the podcast, especially when it came out that they have her under investigation for alleged purported murder plots. And people are asking me, like, how come where is this on the local news? I said it's not. And I find that completely bizarre. Because if they don't believe anything I said, and everything I do in the stories is backed up by documentary evidence or somebody's voice or audio recordings, but all they got to do is just go where I went to, just go to the Supreme Court of Nevada, pull those documents up, and it says right there, under investigation for alleged. People, and I'm addressing the people that have been sending me these emails these past couple of weeks, actually 2 weeks, and it's crazy. I have no idea why none of this is mentioned on the local Las Vegas media, neither on News 3, Fox 5 Las Vegas, 8 News Now, 13 Action News, the print media, Las Vegas Sun, the Las Vegas Review-Journal. I don't know people. I don't work for them. Maybe you need to contact their news directors. But I just wanted to bring it up, Connie, because I know you've been frustrated about that. You want to make a closing comment.
I went to Channel 5. I went to Fox 5 and spoke to Byron Teach. And I think that he is the news director. And I did a 45-minute sit-down interview with him. And, Doug, you were there.
I was there.
We came out, and he goes, oh yes. My gosh, this is unbelievable. This is 2020 material. Yep. I can't even believe all the information that you gave me. Yep. This is absolutely unbelievable. He said, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to start this. So this was in September, end of September. He said, each week, I'm going to do a little more. And I think it was on a Friday afternoon that I went in and did the interview.
It was.
And he said, on Monday, I'm going to start calling around and we're going to start doing stories each week, incrementally building up to the anniversary week of the homicide. And we're going to do a big, huge expose on everything that's gone on. Crickets. He has 45 minutes of information that's documented and verified from my mouth about what's gone on, and he hasn't done a thing. I spoke to the news director at Channel 13 the other day, and I said, you need to look into this case, Nevada Supreme Court. This is the judge. I am the mother that the judge said this to. He goes, those are all claims that you're making. How do I know that you're just not going after? I said, I'm not making any claims. I said, go on the Nevada Supreme Court, and I said, this is where you need to go to read the documentation that's listed about Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson. Why is this not newsworthy? This is election time. We just voted for judges, and the news media here in Las Vegas fails to report on information that directly links to a judge. Do you think that during an election time that would have been relative information or pertinent information to get information out about judges? No, Judge Tobias-In wasn't up for election. My point being is they censor the news. They don't report what affects people. They don't report what matters. They report what sells. This story is something they're not interested in, and I don't understand it. I don't understand it.
I don't understand it either. And people that followed me when I was writing the stories that were published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, everybody knows that I don't write for them anymore. I got my own podcast for a bunch of reasons that I'll explain down the road. But I don't know people. You're sending me these emails and I get phone calls. Where is this on the news? I don't know. Maybe you need to contact the news. But I remember being there with you in September. Yeah. It was a couple of weeks before it would have been this last October would have been the 3-year anniversary of your daughter and Neo's death. And I remember when Byron Teach came out, because I have his card, and I was there when he told you. He was all excited. This is like 2020 front page material. I'm going to get my investigative team on it. It's Friday. On Monday, we're going to do different shows every other night leading up to the thing. And they didn't do basically anything. I even sent him an email at some time ago and said, "Where's all the stories you said you were going to do?" I don't know, Connie. I don't understand it. Now I want to say one thing. Because it's part of my podcast here, so I might as well talk about it since I'm talking. And I don't have the documentation up in front of me right now. I'll try to pull it up. But when Judge Tobiasson went on, her story aired, I think it was the 12th and 13th of April of 2018, and that was on KLAS TV, 8 News Now, I-Team. They did a good story. She talked to him on camera about her daughter, the pimps, the unlicensed clubs, that she was afraid of the vice detectives and all this. Well, after that happened in Las Vegas, everybody thought Judge Tobiasson was a hero, a whistleblower. Matter of fact, when I started writing stories, I wrote stories originally on that. And then when I wrote the story on her that started to be critical of her for certain things that she did, because that's what you do as a journalist. You do the facts. You're not anybody's friend. You're not anybody's enemy. You report the facts. When I was getting all the emails saying, you started out doing this and now you're going against a judge. I'm not going against anybody. We have a 3.5-year unsolved double homicide that Judge Tobiasson claims Detective Grimmett told her the 3 people who did it, they had the evidence against them, and she said, nobody's been arrested because she believes the evidence could have been destroyed. Number 1, she makes statements that she was providing information to an FBI agent and that it came a time when the number 3 guy in the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, his name was Assistant Sheriff Todd Fasulo, he's no longer there. He went to the number 2 guy at the time, Patrick Brodsky, who was the Assistant Special Agent in charge under Aaron Rouse, who's the SAC, and Brodsky told him to stop talking to the judge about the corruption, and she said that came from Special Agent Kevin White, who she was providing information to. So we have all this information going on. But I want to get back to the interview on KLAS TV. Everybody thought Judge Tobiasson was a hero and a whistleblower. So proud of her to come out. Well, the people don't know the backstory on that, and I'm covering that in this podcast. You'll see a lot of screenshots and stuff on this. Connie, I don't know what you're doing, but you're banging and it's coming over the mic. You're banging something on the table. So I'm going to close this out real quick. But I want people to understand, Judge Tobias-In, you've been misled. She's not a whistleblower by any stretch of the imagination. And she's not a hero for that interview on Channel 8. Because let me tell you something. I'm going to explain this further when I do my podcast. It'll be coming out tonight or tomorrow. She did not want, believe it or not, she did not want that interview aired. After it aired, she threatened the I-team who did it, that if they would do anything else, she threatened a lawsuit. That she said she recorded it in case something would happen to her. Otherwise, they weren't supposed to air it, and they did air parts of it. So she's not a whistleblower, people, because whistleblowers don't act like that. You don't turn on the journalists. And I want to know, I don't know what the deal is, but you don't sit down, because she told me when I interviewed her a month later in May of 2018 that was a 4 to 5 hour interview. And she told the investigator for the commission in 2018, his name was Bob Schmidt, and this is part of my podcast coming out, she said to him that that interview was never supposed to be aired. It was not supposed to be for public consumption. Well, he interviewed her in September of 2018. I conducted my interview with Judge Tobias-In in May of 2018, a month after she was on the Channel 8 I-team when they aired the story. And she told me just the opposite. She told me she wanted it aired, and you're going to hear and see that in this podcast coming out, which was contradictory to what she told Bob Schmidt, the investigator. I don't know how anybody, especially a sitting judge, would think you would sit down with a news crew and be interviewed for 4 or 5 hours, and at some point that interview would not be aired. So she turned on Channel 8, and she did the same thing to me. After my story came out in January of 2019 on her on-the-record recorded interview, and I have multiple emails, which you will see in this podcast coming out, where she wanted to get the story out, she wanted to blow the whistle, she wanted to get it go national. I published the story, and then that's the last time I had a communication with her because she was all upset about the format. She didn't think the whole transcript was going to be in there. She didn't like some of the things I said about her threatening Shane Valentine and kicking in his door. Well, that's just too bad because she doesn't determine what is going to go into a story that I write. And if she thought I was going to put in just the good stuff about her and leave out the stuff that she felt was going to get her thrown off the bench and possibly may, well, that's not the way it works. So she did the same thing. And to get this in perspective here, in December of 2019, Judge Tobias-In is under investigation with another judge, Amy Cellini, for entirely separate matter. It has nothing to do with the stuff that I'm interested in. It's basically conduct on becoming a judge for apparel and cursing employees and stuff like that. But at the hearing in December, this past December of 2019, which was recorded by our Nevada judges, and you go on the website, on the internet, and you can find this, they ask her, have you ever threatened anybody? Because she was threatening, the allegations are she threatened some employees at the courthouse, and she said no. So they brought up the story that I wrote that was published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner, and they asked her, well, you said you never threatened anybody, but didn't you tell the guy who was doing the story that you did threaten basically Shane Valentine to his attorney? And that came out, and then she says on there, but that was, I'm taking this off the top of my head because I don't have the thing in front of me, she said, that was a recording of a conversation that was never to be made public. Same thing she did to Channel 8, she did to me, and I don't know what's going on with her. But all this is coming out in the podcast, should be tonight or tomorrow, and today's Tuesday. It may be out late tonight or tomorrow, because I don't know what's going on, including, that I'm not going to talk about right now, some further breaking news that I obtained that contradicts what she told me about why she believed the murders happened. So that's all I'm going to say at this point, and people could listen to the podcast and when it comes out. Listen, Connie, we're gonna do this again. We're gonna have a much longer podcast, and we're gonna be talking about everything that's in mind with these murders. But I appreciate your time, and have a good night.
Thank you, Doug.
Shortly, you will hear my recorded interview that I gave earlier this year to the investigator for the Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline, which concerned my contact with Las Vegas Justice Court Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, which were the basis for my stories. My interview, along with other interviews that the Commission's investigator had obtained during the course of his investigation, have not been made public as of this time. As I stated in episode 4, according to court records, along with the commission, Judge Tobias-In and her counsel have the audio recordings of all the interviews that were conducted, and as such are no doubt fully aware of the content of those interviews. So, with that said, and in the interest of journalistic transparency, I have no problem publicly releasing my recording that I made of my voluntary interview with the Commission's investigator. I might add that I agreed to that interview in hopes that it will further justice, as there are currently still way too many unanswered questions involving Judge Tobias-In and also her statements that she made concerning the unsolved 2016 Land Kaufman murders. Before I get to my interview, here is an update to episode 4. Judge Tobias-In's counsel informed the court on Tuesday, June 16, 2020, that they made a mistake when they erroneously contended that Connie Land's complaint was not filed correctly with the commission, when in fact it was. Las Vegas attorney Vincent Savarese III stated to the court, "Counsel assures the court in complete good faith that this was a matter of error, that counsel readily concedes, and that no dishonesty or imposition upon either the court or commission counsel was thereby intended, and in 40 years as member of the bar has never made a similar error before. Counsel sincerely apologizes for this honest mistake. Counsel therefore prays that the court and the commission counsel accept this admission and sincere apology and will forgive this oversight as such. Respectfully submitted the 16th day of June 2020. And now, here is my interview that I gave the Commission's investigator earlier this year."
All right, transcriber. Today's date is January 13th, 2020. The time is approximately 1:31 p.m. This is Investigator Adam Ognansky with Spencer Investigations, Reno, Nevada, who are contracted by the State of Nevada Commission on Judicial Discipline. The location of this interview is in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, for the record, can you please spell your first and last name for me?
Sure. Doug, short for Douglas, Douglas. Last name is Poppa, Poppa.
Okay, and what's a good phone number for you?
Cell phone 702.
Okay, Doug, are you aware this interview is being recorded?
No problem.
Okay. Now, as a reminder, I have a nasty habit of talking at the same time somebody else does, and the transcribers can't stand that because they have two voices at the same time.
I make that mistake too.
So I'm going to try not to do that. If you can try and help me out with that, that would be great.
That's fine.
All right, this interview is in reference to investigation listed under Nevada Commission Judicial Discipline Case number 2019-005. The initial complaint contains allegations of potential violations of judicial canon rules contained in Canon 1, Canon 2, and Canon 3, along with allegations that implicate violations of law. Okay, now you're currently an investigative reporter?
That's true. I do part-time investigations that are published. My stories are published by the Baltimore Post-Examiner.
Okay, how long have you been doing that?
I think my first story I wrote for them was in 2015.
And Baltimore Post-Examiner, that's an internet news agency?
It's an online news organization based out of Baltimore.
Okay. What did you do before being involved in writing for Baltimore Post-Examiner?
The current job I had right before that was U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And prior to that, I was Director of Security and Surveillance at the Riviera Hotel and Casino for 10 years.
Okay. Ever in law enforcement?
Yes, 16 years combined. 2 years I spent with the New York City Police Department, Auxiliary Forces Section. Then I went in the military in 1976. I was a U.S. Army military policeman for 3 years. Got out, was in the inactive reserves. Got hired by the Herndon Police Department in Virginia in 1979 as a police officer. Stayed there for a year, and then I switched over in 1980 to the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. I was the Sheriff's Office for approximately 12 years. Patrolled for the first couple of years. I was promoted to detective criminal investigator and spent a lot of my time working undercover operations.
Okay. How and when did you learn of Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson?
To be honest with you, I never heard of Judge Tobias-In until one day I got a call from a police officer, and I gave you his name. I don't want to mention it on tape.
Okay.
And
he's retired now?
He's retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department detective. And I wrote about 150 stories on the October 1st Las Vegas massacre for the Baltimore Post-Examiner. He was reading a lot of my stories, as a lot of cops were, and I have a lot of police sources. Anyway, long story short, he contacted me, I'm going to say in the early part, the spring of 2018, last year, and he said, you know about this judge? And I said, no. He goes, well, she was on the news and something, and she's talking about corruption. So I think at that time I watched the interview she did on KLAS Channel 8 television.
Okay,
It was Judge Melanie, Andress-Tobiasson, and she was speaking to them about where she had gone to vice detectives about unlicensed clubs that were fronts for prostitution. And
was that in April of 2018?
that aired on April 12th or 13th of 2018. So when I spoke to the detective, he said that this judge wanted to get the story out as much as she could, and he recommended that she talk to me. I never met Judge Tobias-In in person. I subsequently made contact with her, and I believe I may have had some conference calls with her and the source before I actually talked to her. Anyway, long story short, we made contact, and on May 7th of 2018, she gave me a recorded interview on the phone, which was on the record, and it was about an hour and a half. Subsequently to that, we had more communication through text messages, email messages, and several phone conversations. In January of 2019, I ended up publishing pretty much her entire, the transcript of her entire testimony. At the time I talked to her, I was talking to a sitting judge who was alleging corruption within the police department. She was talking about the Land-Kaufman murders. At the time, I did not know anything about the Land-Kaufman murders. So, you're talking to a judge, credible source. I ended up publishing, the story got published, I believe, on January 28th of 2019 in the Baltimore Post-Examiner.
Okay, January, what was it?
January 28th or the 21st of 2019 is when the Baltimore Examiner published the initial story, and I think it was titled FBI refuses, I can't remember that, something about the FBI refuses to talk to a judge about corruption.
Okay. Now, since you first met her, well, you didn't really meet her in person.
I never met her in person.
Okay.
Not at that time.
Okay. So, when was your first contact with her?
You mean a physical contact?
No. When you first talked to her?
The interview was conducted on May 7th,
Okay.
but there was several conversations I had before her when the source had introduced me to her, just brief conversations about who I was and stuff.
Okay.
And then I called her back that night on May 7th, and that's when the interview was done.
Okay. In total, how many interactions would you say you had with Judge Tobias-In since you first contacted her?
Well, we had the initial interview. Since the interview, she had sent me numerous email messages relating to other aspects of that Woody had talked about in the interview, and then new stuff relating to what she was telling me was possible corruption within the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And then there was a lot of phone calls because a lot of times Judge Tobias-In would like call up, because she had my cell phone and stuff. She would just call up at different hours late at night and be going off, talking about something else. And most of those times I didn't have a chance to write it down, or I'd be in my truck driving and she'd call up and say, hey, I need to tell you about, excuse my language, that's the way she talked. This motherfucker and that motherfucker, that's the way she talked. So there was those conversations that went on.
Did you find that unusual for a judge to speak that way?
Well, what I found unusual is when I actually interviewed her on the recorded interview, which for the story is when she was pretty blunt in her language, which kind of shocked me because I interacted with judges, in my law enforcement career and never heard judges either on or off the bench talk the way she talked. But, that's the way she was, so I want to get the information down, and I did. So there was several communication for several months in 2018 after the first interview with the judge.
Okay, now the only recorded conversation that you have with her is from your interview from May 7th?
That's correct.
Okay. Did you save all the other emails and exchanges that you had between you and her?
There was, I saved, yes. Now my computer in the summer of 2018 had crashed, and I lost a lot of stuff that was on the computer, but I also had a lot of emails and stuff that were printed out. And some of those email messages, not all of them, were requested by, I think his name was Paul Delisle when he spoke to me. So I did give the commission some of those email messages, but there's other stuff that she talked about in different messages that I haven't given anybody because some of that stuff like still under investigation. About she's talking about several other things that happened on the police department and talking about different people.
Okay. Was Judge Tobias-In aware that the interview was recorded on May 2nd?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Was there any, to your knowledge, was there anybody present during the interview?
There wasn't anybody present here,
Mm-hmm.
but when I asked her on the interview I think she said at the time that her kids were at home, but they were upstairs, and if they came down, she would have to stop the interview, but they never came down.
Okay. And you said the interview was about an hour and a half?
About an hour and a half.
Okay. And you have a copy of the recorded interview?
I do.
Okay. And you provided me with the transcript of the interview?
Yes,
And who did that transcript?
I did.
Is the audio also available?
I have the audio.
Okay. Is that something that the commission can have a copy of?
We want to turn that over because it was done. It's covered under journalistic view because it's the word product and stuff. But the transcript I gave you is the last one I gave you the other day is the full transcript of the entire interview with her when she's talking about the allegations that she talked to you about.
Okay.
But I will say this: we did publish some audio clips in several of the stories that I wrote after the first story. And those clips were provided to the commission. They wanted them earlier this year, and I did give them.
Okay.
And those were the important ones when she's talking about that she threatened Shane Valentine, when she kicked in the door, and about the murders, when she's talking about the Land Kaufman murders. So that stuff was given to the commission.
Okay. Now, you also completed several articles regarding Judge Tobias-In for the Baltimore Post-Examiner, correct?
Just under 30, I believe.
Okay. And you provided me with a list of those?
I did the other day. I think it was actually 27 or 28 without counting the story, that Connie Land story that she wrote,
Okay.
titled My Daughter.
Just, transcriber, I'm going to mark this as exhibit number 1. And this is Baltimore Post-Examiner articles, Judge Tobias-In, that's the title. And it was provided to me by Doug Poppa, and it lists 27 articles. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, in reading some of your articles, you mentioned numerous exchanges of emails that you had with Judge Tobias-In, and some of those could not be recovered, correct?
There was stuff that was on my computer. When the computer crashed, I did lose a lot of stuff, not only with this one, some stuff, but there was other stuff that I had on that printed out, and I did forward some of the emails that were requested by the commission earlier this year.
Okay. Did you provide to the commission specifically an email that was dated May 13th, 2018, that was sent to you from Judge Tobias-In that pretty much ordered you to write the story and for you to go public with the whole thing?
That's correct.
And the commission has that
I
email?
believe they do.
Okay. Now, you also mentioned in a recent article dated December 19, 2019, that Judge Tobias-In may have lied to the commission during her latest hearing.
That's correct.
Okay. Was this in regards to her recorded conversation with you, giving you permission to publish her story?
That's correct. It was an on-the-record recorded interview, and she said it was not meant to be published. And when I did that story, I also put in there not only that email message, but several other text messages that I had received. 2 came from the source, the retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, that she had sent to him also, saying that she wanted to go public with the story, just to show that she did want to get the story out. Because if she didn't want to get the story out, I would never have sat down for an hour and a half and wasted my time.
Right. So she fully understood that you were going to publish the entire interview you had with her?
Yes.
Okay. And the interview transcript, transcriber, just to let you know, was provided to me by Doug Poppa, and it's 33 pages, and it's titled Tobias-In Interview, May 7, 2018.
That's correct. She starts out, this all started in the summer of 2015, and then the last thing she talked about when it stops is the last sentence is they blatantly lied, saying they never knew Shane Valentine's name prior to that.
Copy. Thank you. And that's just FYI, transcriber has 33 pages in that. Did Judge Tobias-In inform you at any time during your interview that she had been conducting her own investigation into a pimp known as Shane Valentine and a business known as Top Notch.
Yes.
How long did she say her investigation was, and how did she describe her investigative tactics?
I believe she said this went on for about a year, I believe starting in 2015, but I'm not referencing the report, I'm just coming off the top of my head. And it was during that period of time, from the best I can remember, is her daughter, Sarah Tobias-In, started hanging out at what she considered to be a clothing store that was a front for an after-hours unlicensed club that had underage girls in it, a front for prostitution, frequented by off-duty Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department police officers. Her daughter started hanging out there. The time she told me, that's my recollection, is that her daughter at the time was a sophomore, I believe, in Bishop Gorman High School. She would have been 15 or 16 years old. She told me that she allowed her daughter to go in there and hang out because she didn't want to, destroy the relationship between her and her daughter or something to that effect.
Okay. Did she ever inform you as to what she did with the information that she obtained during her investigation?
Yes, she told me, and this was not corroborated because the police would not talk to me, but she told me that she was forwarding the information about the activities of the unlicensed clubs to LVMPD vice detectives. Some vice detectives, she named some of them during the course of my interview with her. I believe off the top of my head, it was Vice Detective Al Bias, she said she spoke to, Vice Detective Kelly Bluth, Vice Detective Kathy Huey, Vice Detective, there were some of the names, Van Cleef, I think it's Bill Van Cleef, she mentioned his name on a couple of things. And then when she ends up telling me about the murders and how she was outed, she mentioned Vice Detective Justine Gaddis.
Okay. Now, during that, did Judge Tobias-In also inform you that one of these pimps who were apparently running this club, this Top Notch, was having a case heard in front of her?
Yes, that would have been Shane Valentine.
Okay. Did she tell you of another pimp besides Shane Valentine that had a case in front of her?
Yes. At one point, she mentions Marlon Brown. Now, Marlon Brown, from my recollection of talking to her, she said was the owner who was running with another pimp, Top Notch, which was the unlicensed clothing store front for prostitution.
Okay. So she mentioned this in your it's in your
Absolutely.
transcript. Okay.
Absolutely.
Now, you also mentioned the threat that Judge Tobias-In made against Shane Valentine to Shane Valentine's attorney. She told you this during your recorded interview, correct?
Yes, she said that she was frustrated because the police weren't working on the information she was providing them, and she said that she threatened Shane Valentine through his attorney and said to give your client a message, if he goes near my daughter or something to that effect, I'll take care of it myself, something I'm paraphrasing, that's basically what she said.
And that's also in the transcript.
That's also in there.
Now, you claim that during the recent commission hearing, it was not mentioned that Judge Tobias-In admitting during your recorded interview that she went to Shane Valentine's house and kicked in the door.
That's right, because she told me that too in the interview.
Okay, and this statement was also in your transcript?
It is.
Okay. Go ahead.
I need to get some water for a second.
Sure.
They had the flu last week. The throat's kind of dry. Okay.
Now, Doug, during your investigative report, you also interviewed Shane Valentine's mother, right?
Not at that time. I interviewed Shane Valentine's mother just a few months ago at the parole hearing. He was coming up for parole out here in Las Vegas, and I attended. He didn't get the parole, but when the mother left, Shane Valentine's mother, Dina left, I did talk to her out in the parking lot.
Okay. When was that?
I'm going to say I believe it was October. In the month of October, it was the parole hearing of 2019.
Okay. Now, did she say anything about a kicked-in door by Judge Tobias-In?
Yes, I brought that up to her because I didn't know who the attorney was. Judge Tobias-In didn't mention to me the attorney that she relayed the message, the threat to. And then when I mentioned that to Mrs. Valentine, she told me it was Bill Terry.
That she made the threat to?
She said, yes, Bill Terry. I said, I don't know, the attorney was Bill Terry.
Okay. What about, did she mention anything about a kicked-in door?
She said, I asked her if she knew where Shane was living when the judge kicked in the door to her house. She said no, she didn't know where he was living at the time. But she said she also heard that her car had been kicked in. And some people had told her that the judge did it, but I could never find that out one way or another after that.
And she described Tobias-In, she described her as a vigilante?
The vigilante judge, because she said he's targeting my daughter. Excuse me, he's targeting my son, Shane.
Okay. Now, did Judge Tobias-In also make a statement referenced one of the pimps known as Marlon Brown, who owned a Top Notch and was actually protecting Judge Tobias-In's juvenile daughter as she allowed her daughter to hang out and work inside the Top Notch Club?
Yes, she made the statement that had her daughter been 18, Marlon Brown probably would have put daughter out on the strip prostituting or beat her up. But he was protecting her while she was inside the club, which I found pretty horrendous statement for not only a mother but a judge to have a daughter go into an establishment like that and work.
So she's, and it's in the transcript, that she's pretty much allowing this pimp Marlon Brown to supervise her juvenile girl.
In essence, that's what she said, yes.
Now, Judge Tobias-In also admitted to you during your recorded interview or email, I can't remember which one, that Channel 8 News did a 4 or 5 hour interview with her?
That's correct. Again, I don't have not reading from the report. From the best of my recollection, that was part of I brought that up, and I said to her, I saw the interview you did that KLS, the I-Team, Channel 8, KLAS TV in Las Vegas did, and I asked her, was that the entire interview or was those excerpts? And then she said to me, no, that was never supposed to be aired. So she says, yes, and I believe it's in the transcript that I have there that she said she spoke to him like 4 or 5 hours, but she said it was not supposed to be aired.
Okay. Now, Judge Tobias-In agreed along with her counsel to air this interview, right? The Channel 8 interview? Did she tell you that?
She told me that in the interview, okay? Which I later found out that this was not the time I was doing the interview, but I later found out when I brought up the KLS thing, when she said she didn't want it to be aired, because I had read the transcript of Bob Schmidt from Spencer Investigations, who interviewed her in September of 2018, was before my story was published, okay? I didn't know about it at that time. So after the story was published, I subsequently read that transcript, and I saw in there where she tells Mr. Schmidt, to the best of my recollection, that she did not want the story to be published. She did not know it was going to be published like the day before, and it wasn't supposed to be aired, which was contradictory to what she had told me, because she said my attorney came, and when she told me in the interview in May of 2018, my attorney finally came to me and said, we have to air the story. And then she says, so they did, they aired the story, referring to Channel 8, which was a contradiction to, I believe, what she said to Mr. Schmidt, where she didn't want it aired, because she told me she gave me permission to air it.
Okay. Did you ask her during your interview if everything that she mentioned during the Channel 8 interview was truthful?
No, I don't think that came up in there.
Now, you stated during the recent commission hearing that Judge Tobias-In acknowledged that she knew one FBI agent, but she was no longer allowed to speak to him.
That's in my story from her verbatim, which she said on the recording.
Okay, and that's from the May 7th interview?
Let me say, not the recording from May 2018. It was the audio recording from her testimony 2 months ago in front of the commission when the agent, she was told that. I don't believe she named the agent, but the agent she was referring to, where she mentioned his name to me when I did the interview, was Special Agent Kevin White from the Las Vegas Division Field Office.
Okay, and she identified him as the friend, the FBI agent friend?
She identified, in my interview with her, I asked her, she initially didn't want to give me his name, and I said, well, give it to me, and she gave it to me, and it was Kevin White, and then she subsequently told me during that interview, there came a time when Special Agent Kevin White told her he could no longer talk to her because his boss at the time, who was the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Las Vegas Division, Patrick Brodsky, according to the judge, Kevin White told her that Todd Fasulo, who was the assistant sheriff, the number 3 guy at the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department at the time, went to Patrick Brodsky, his boss, the number 2 guy in the Las Vegas FBI, and basically told him, have your agent stop talking to the judge. She does explain that in detail to me in my interview for May of 2018.
Okay. Now, Brodsky is Brodsky.
Patrick Brodsky, Brodsky. He was the number 2 guy under Aaron Rouse, who's the SAC. He retired, which was interesting when I did stories on this also. I did like 27 stories. And Todd Fasulo retired from the LVMPD, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, in December of 2017. He went to work sometime after that in 2019 for Wynn Resorts as an executive running security operations or investigations over there. Patrick Brodsky, I later found out, and I did a story on this, retired from the FBI in April of 2019, and a month later, he went to work as a security executive working with Todd Fasulo, also at Wynn, and I did some stories on this also.
Okay. Now, you also interviewed Connie Land, correct?
Yes, I interviewed Connie Land. I spoke to Connie Land multiple times since I first made contact with her, which was right after I didn't know anything about, Judge mentioned the Land Kaufman murders when I talked to her, and did mention this person, Connie Land, that she says that I have text messages. I didn't know anything about what she was talking about because I didn't even know about the Land Kaufman murders. After I did the Baltimore Post, because I'm going to publish my first story in January of 2019, the one that was titled FBI Refuses Information from the Judge or something like that, I started researching about the Land Kaufman murders, and one of the first things that came up was a podcast where Connie Land, who's the mother of Sidney Land, one of the victims, the other victim was her boyfriend, Nehemiah and Neil Kaufman. They were murdered in 2016, October of 2016. And right after that story, I started to research the Land Kaufman murders to find out what's going on with that. And the first thing I pulled up was a podcast, and I heard Connie Land talking on this radio podcast, and she was saying that the case is never going to get solved because there's alleged police corruption and all this stuff, and I thought that was interesting. After listening to that podcast, I think it was like, I can't say it was the next day or 2 days later, but it was late at night because I don't sleep. I don't sleep till 6 in the morning. I forget other people are sleeping at 10 o'clock at night. I think it was like 11:30 or 12 o'clock that night. I made contact with Connie Land. I got a phone number and stuff through investigative stuff, and I called her up, and I think the woman thought I was a nutcase. I told her who I was, and I wrote the story, and I wanted to do a story about the murders. And I think she thought I was crazy, and then she'd give me a name, and then it was sometime after that where she had called me back and found out that I was indeed, an ex-cop writing stories, and that's how I met Connie Land at that point.
Okay. Now, during your interview with Connie Land, did she inform you that Judge Tobias-In used her position as a judge to obtain information from Connie Land regarding Shane Valentine, and also to obtain information on the murders of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman?
Absolutely.
What exactly did she tell you about that?
She told me quite a bit that I was unaware of at the time I did the interview with Judge Tobias-In. One of the biggest things that stuck out with me is she said there came a time in, I think it was early or spring of 2017, where Judge Tobias-In had reached out to her, and over the phone or through a text message, and subsequently after that they had met in person, and she told me that Melanie Tobias-In introduced herself, said she was a sitting judge, and this relationship with them went on for a couple of months. And during that couple-month period, the judge convinced her in a bizarre series of events that I published in several stories to turn over all her communication, text messages, emails, that Mrs. Land was having with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Detective Mitchell Dosh, who was one of the 2 investigators working her daughter's homicide. And she told me subsequently that the judge was telling her that Dosh was corrupt, couldn't be trusted, that she could only trust this detective Grimmett.
Now Dosh is D-O-S-C-H,
Mitchell Dosh.
And then Grimmett?
Grimmett is Jared Grimmett. It's Jarrod, and the last name is Grimmett. Now
these are the 2 detectives who are handling the Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman homicide, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Judge Tobias-In did tell me in the interview, and then in subsequent emails, that she was receiving, right after the murders, confidential information relating to the Land Kaufman murders from Detective Grimmett, including the evidence with DNA evidence they had. And she even made the statement to me in the interview that Shane Valentine, Frankie Zapier, who's a female, she's the
Z-A.
It's Frankie, last name is Zappia, Zappia. She's the stepdaughter of a now retired Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Daniel, nicknamed Dano, D-N-O, Giersdorf, and his last name is spelled Giersdorf. And Dominique Thompson, it's Dominique, it's a male, Dominique, Thompson, Thompson, nicknamed Damo. According to the judge, Shane Valentine, Frankie Zappia, and Dominique Thompson, based on the information that the cops were telling her, executed Neo Kaufman and Sidney Land at 12:30 in the morning on October 26, 2016. The judge tells me that in the interview, the recorded interview.
Did the judge also tell you in the interview that her daughter told her that Shane Valentine was the one that committed the murders?
Yes, she said before we get into that, she also told me relating to the murders that there came a time she said it was about 4:30 in the afternoon of October 25th, 2016. She received a telephone call, and this is coming off the top of my head, I'm not reading this from notes, from LVMPD, Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Vice Detective Bill Van Cleef, who called the judge up, according to the judge, and said he was in a meeting with Vice Detective Justine Gaddis, and I think another detective, and that they had called in Ty Bowden, who's a current Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department police officer, and his daughter, Allie Bowden, to talk to them about what she knew about underage prostitution, because the judge told me in my interview with her that Allie Bowden was best friends with her daughter, Sarah Tobias-In, and that Allie Bowden was a prostitute who was working for Shane Valentine, who then left Shane Valentine, was working for Neo Kaufman. So the police, according to the judge, pulled Ty Bowden and Allie Bowden in at about 4:30 in the afternoon, October 25th, 2016. But during that interview, Bill Van Cleef, the detective, calls Judge Tobias-In up and tells her that Justine Gaddis just outed the judge and her daughter as a source of confidential information, because the judge, like I said, was giving information to the police based on the unlicensed clubs. So basically, according to the judge, Detective Van Cleef tells her that Justine Gaddis outed her and her daughter to Ty Bowden and his daughter, that they received the information from the judge. And the judge tells me that 8 hours later, at 12:30 in the morning, the murders happened, and that was a result of her getting outed to Allie Bowden and her father. The judge also said, and this is from memory, I'm not reading this from notes, that after they were outed in the meeting, according to the judge, she said she called up her daughter, Sarah, and Allie, and had them come over to her house. Now, this would have been after 4:30 p.m. on October 25th, 2016. The judge says, but that's my recollection, sometime during the night, she says, Allie left my house and put out a text that she was brought in and spoken to by vice detectives. And she said that whole series of events resulted in the murders of Neo Kaufman and Sidney Land, but she also said to me that it wasn't not supposed to be Sidney Land and Neo Kaufman who were not the ones to be murdered. It was her and her daughter who were meant to be killed, not Neo and Sidney. She never explained to me in that interview why she believes that.
Okay. Now, the information that Connie Land provided all the information to Judge Tobias-In. Did Connie Land tell you why she was providing all this information to Judge Tobias-In?
One of the things I remember is that the judge told her that she had a friend, it's trying to be the FBI. The FBI was going to investigate her daughter's death. So Connie, looking for help, trusting the judge because of her position, ended up turning over all the communication that the judge wanted between her and Homicide Detective Mitchell Dosh. There came a period of time when Connie told me she finally realized that the FBI was not investigating her daughter's death.
Okay. Now, at one point during her interview with Judge Tobias-In, she was upset that detectives failed to notify her of Sidney Land and Nehemiah Kaufman's murders immediately.
That's what she said to me.
Okay. Now, Judge Tobias-In apparently then contacted detectives at midnight to confirm that the murders occurred.
There's, I don't remember what she said, but I remember her telling me that after they were outed, when she found out the murders happened, because her daughter had told her that her friend Neil, Sarah's friend Neil, this is what the judge is telling me, Mom, my friend Neil was killed and Shane Valentine did the murders. At some point, she had called back Detective Van Cleef, it was Bill Van Cleef, and questioned him on why they didn't call the judge up and tell her that the murders were committed, because the judge says, you have a target now on me and my daughter, but she still didn't explain to me, and I didn't ask at that time because I thought I would be able to follow up with her, later on, and that never happened because after a story was published, broke off contact. So what I don't know at this point in time is how Neil and Sidney Land and Neil Kaufman, who were murdered, but according to the judge, it was supposed to be her and her daughter who were supposed to be murdered, not Neil and Sidney. It certainly wasn't because of description, because Neil and Sidney don't look anything like the judge and her daughter. So to this day, I don't know why the judge believes the wrong two people got murdered.
Okay. Do you suspect that Sarah Tobias-In knows about these murders more than she's telling?
I've been doing this for a year, okay? Talked to a lot of people, wrote a lot of stories. This is my own personal opinion from an investigative standpoint. I'm a former criminal investigator. I believe, this is speculation on my part, that the reason why the judge wanted all the communication between Connie Land and Mitchell Dosh is because she was, according to the judge, and I don't know if this is true, but she said Detective Grimmett was giving her all the information about the homicides. But Detective Grimmett was the initial homicide investigation, allegedly was the lead homicide detective on that case. Sometime, from what I understand, a week or two later, he's taken off as the lead, and the lead goes to Mitchell Dosh. But they're still working the case together. Now, the judge, according to Connie Land, tells her, Connie Land, you cannot trust Dosh because he's corrupt. You can only trust Detective Grimmett. Now, my investigative mind goes in thinking, okay, so she was getting information from Detective Grimmett, according to her, and I don't know if that's true because the police would never acknowledge anything when I send requests to them. So what she doesn't have at this point is if Grimmett is telling her, but he's communicating with Connie Land, and I don't know what those text messages are. This is just my speculation. So now she has to say, how can I find out what Dosh is getting from Connie Land? This is before she spoke to Connie. So now she's got to introduce herself into Connie Land's life to try to get the information of what Dosh. And I believe, and this is strictly from an investigative standpoint, that the reason why she wanted that communication, I believe she wanted to see if her daughter's name was going to be mentioned in any of those messages for this, because here's something that, and I've been doing this for a year, I'm thinking, okay? She tells me, and never fully explained it, that after getting outed in the meeting, Allie and Sarah come over her house. And she says, I basically give them a BS story that I didn't out them because she didn't want to think that she was giving information to the police. Sometime later, she says, like I already stated, Allie Bowden left my house and put out a text that they were outed, which she says resulted in the murders. What I don't know from this day is, how does Judge Tobias-In, if indeed Judge Tobias-In is telling the truth on this, that Allie did go over her house with her daughter and left the house in the night, did Sarah go with Allie, who was her best friend, when they left the house? Where did they go? Because how does Judge Tobias-In know that that Allie put out a text message that she was in this meeting and they got outed? How would she know that? One, if Sarah was not with her, or if the police gave her that information, Detective Grimmett. I mean, unless she's a mind reader.
Right. Now, like you said, you worked in law enforcement. You worked in investigations. This was an ongoing murder investigation and still is.
Absolutely. 3 years later, unsolved.
Okay. Would you consider Judge Tobias-In's inserting herself into this murder investigation as being an obstruction of the investigation?
It's totally inappropriate. To me, it's out of line. If indeed she's telling the truth, and Detective Grimmett was giving her this information, why was he giving information on the homicide, which you don't do? I mean, that's something you don't do. That's confidential. This is a double homicide. Even if a judge is asking you, would say, Judge, I can't talk to you about it. She says he was providing information. Not only does she say that in the May 2018 interview, but I also provided email messages to the commission months ago where she actually mentions Grimmett's name in emails to me that she was getting information for him. So it's double corroborated. According to the judge, I never spoken to Grimmett. So if she's telling the truth, why she inserted herself into this homicide, the only thing I could think of is she's trying to protect her daughter for some reason. Not to say Sarah did the murders, but remember, she tells me that Sarah said, Mom, my friend Neo got killed. Remember, Judge Tobias-In says continually in the interview with her that Allie Bowden and her daughter have been best friends since they were sophomores in school, and she alleges, the judge, not me, that Allie Bowden was a prostitute for Shane Valentine. Shane Valentine was a pimp, and then some point in time before the murders, Allie leaves Shane and is now a prostitute, according to the judge, for Neo Kaufman. She goes one step further in the interview with me when she says she was getting information from Grimmett, but then she says to me, and that's in that 30-page interview, the transcript you have, is that after the murders, the police got a hold of Neo's text messages on his phone. And according to the judge, she said there were text messages between Neo and Allie indicating that Allie indeed was a prostitute, and the police have those text messages, so that's also in there. Again, this is coming from the judge. Whether any of this is true, I don't know, because the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department would not talk to me or give me any comment on any of this stuff when I sent the media request.
Okay. So during your interview, Judge Tobias-In really didn't mention any legal or reasonable reason why she's requesting all this information from Connie Land, did she?
No, you got to remember, at the time she's talking, and I let people talk on the interview, you can see I'm there very rarely to interrupt. I want to name or something because I want people to talk. I have no idea that the Land Kaufman murders. I didn't even know who Connie Land was. She does mention her once in there when she says to me in that interview, I have all the text messages, but I didn't know what she was talking about between Mitchell Dorsch and Connie Land. It was subsequently after that when I did further investigation, when I found all the rest of the stuff out.
Okay. Did Connie Land inform you that she was using burner phones to communicate with Judge Tobias-In?
Yes. She said there came a time in 2017 after meeting the judge that the judge said they had to get burner phones. And Connie told me that for the judge's request, Connie went out and bought 3 burner phones, one for herself, one for Judge Melanie Andress-Tobiasson, and one for Ariane Zappia.
How do you spell that?
Ariane, Aryanne, Zappia, Zappia, who's also the sister or half-sister of Frankie Zappia, who the judge said was the suspect. Ariane, according to Connie, had befriended Connie in 2017 because she knew Sydney about the murders and they were talking, so that's how they got in. But so they were talking, so the judge wanted that all the 3 of them should have burner phones. And Connie told me that she did go out and have burner phones. There also came a time after, and this is what Connie told me, and I think this was published in a story, that after KLAS TV Channel 8 I-Team aired Judge Tobias' story, which is April 12th or 13th of 2018, Special Agent Vanitha Pandy, there we go again from my mind, Vanitha, Vanitha, Pandy, Pandy, she was at the time a special agent, according to what Connie told me, at the Las Vegas division of the FBI working human trafficking. Vanitha Pandy, because Connie had been talking to the FBI about this whole thing. Vanitha Pandy had called her up and wanted Connie's burner phone that contained the text messages and the messages between Connie Land and Judge Tobias-In. Connie told me subsequently she went down to FBI headquarters down here in Vegas and she turned over the phone, and the FBI had possession of that phone for several months and kind of does not know why they wanted it.
Okay. Now, you mentioning Ariane Zappia, you interviewed her, correct?
Yes. I interviewed her last year on the record, recorded, and
Do you have a transcript of that interview?
I published most of the stuff that she talked about in several stories, okay? Some stuff I didn't because I would do a follow-up story, but Ariane Zapier is the sister or half-sister of Frankie Zapier. She was very upfront with me, Ariane. She said she was a prostitute for 6 months working for a pimp named Anthony Galassi. She had left him. She was a former drug addict. She changed her life around. I found her to be very upfront and honest when I talked to her. She relayed a lot of stuff to me, including how she and why she met Connie Land, got interviewed with her.
Do you find her credible?
I found her credible. I tried to get her caught up in a couple lies a couple of times and see if she would change testimony. She was pretty upfront with me on everything. She told me her background. And the reason why she wanted this, she wanted me to publish that in a story. So if something ever happens to me and my kid grows up and he hears rumors, I want to. So I published that in a story.
Now, you had an article dated February 18, 2019 that mentioned Judge Tobias-In had interfered in the Anthony Galassi case where Ariane Zapier was the victim. Now, apparently Judge Tobias-In intimidated Ariane Zapier and maybe influenced the prosecutor in that case. Do you recall anything like that?
I don't have the story in front of me, but just coming off the top of head, I remember Ariane telling me that, Ariane met Judge Tobias-In in person at some point in time and did a story on it. And according to Ariane, the judge was attempting to offer a bribe to change her testimony that Ariane had given Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department homicide detectives about the murders and Shane Valentine, basically to implicate Shane Valentine into the murders. That never followed through. She said she had met her at a restaurant or some type of fast food place in Las Vegas, and no money was exchanged, although the judge said she was going to pay for her kids something to do with the kids' party or something, but she never took any money from the judge. Subsequently, Judge Tobias-In mentioned to me this Kevin White, who was a special agent from the FBI. Ariane Zapier told me there came a time when she did meet an FBI agent who actually turned out to be Kevin White, but according to Ariane, he identified himself as Jason. And because he identified himself as Jason, I know this is getting convoluted here from the top of my head, there came a time when Ariane said she met with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department criminal intelligence detectives. I think one guy's name was Mike Wilson. I don't know who the other guy is off the top of my head. And at some point in time, I believe it was they that gave her a lineup, maybe with an FBI agent or something that she met in a car, for her to pick out this Kevin White, who identified himself as Jason. And she said she did pick out the guy, and so and I did a story on that.
Okay.
That's what she told me.
Now, in that same article we were just talking about, with the bribe, states that Judge Tobias-In attempted to bribe Ariane Zapier, asking her to change her initial statements that she made to detectives, reference who did the homicide, right? Judge Tobias-In apparently wanted her to say that Shane Valentine was the one that did it, and not her initial one who she identified, correct?
That's the best of my recollection. Now, when I also did that story, I also published in the story Tobias-In's response, Judge Tobias-In's response, because in a subsequent email, and I don't have the date of it, and I think I provided that to the commission.
Was that the May 13, 2018?
It may be another one, but there came a time in an email where she tells me that, by the way, they tried to get Ariane to say that I bribed her, and according to the judge, that was concocted, that plan, by LVMPD. When I say LVMPD, that's short for Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, Vice Detective Greg Flores, and I believe she said her stepfather, Daniel Gersdorf, was a tried cop, that they concocted the story to Ariane to frame the judge. So I did put that response into the judge just because I had it. The whole purpose of everything that I'm doing is just to uncover the truth.
So she denied that there was any bribe allegation?
I believe that's what she said in that email.
Okay. Now, Judge Tobias-In sent you emails after you published her story on January 21st, 2019. And the subsequent emails from Judge Tobias-In, one of them read, "There are certain parts that are going to ruin me. I'm mortified. I already have a discipline complaint. Can you delete the parts about me contacting the attorney, please? judicial discipline will use this to remove me from the bench. I'm toast. And you supplied these copies of these emails to the commission, right?
That's correct.
January 22nd, 2019 email that you provided to the commission also states, I'm imploring you to take this article down to lessen the damage to me.
That's correct.
Okay. Did you have any other, after this email, was there any other conversation you had with her?
I believe there was. There was subsequent emails that Judge Tobias would talk about, and that I haven't turned over to anybody, where she was talking about different things that were going on in the LVMPD that I haven't published in a story yet for a bunch of reasons.
Okay. Now, you interviewed other people besides your interview, Judge Tobias, and you said you interviewed Connie Land, correct?
Yes.
Ariane Zappia.
That's correct.
You interviewed Dano Deersdorf?
Deersdorf, yes, I did.
Okay. And anybody else?
Well, that's pretty broad when you say anybody else. I've spoken to. I have a lot of sources. Okay.
Right. I'm talking about doing an interview.
An on-record recorded interview.
Yes.
Published stories. That would have been Judge Tobias-In, Connie Land, Ariane Zappia, and her stepdad Daniel Giersdorf.
Okay. And you already said that you received many phone calls from Judge Tobias-In during the middle of the night, sometimes at various stages where she used vulgar language.
She would just call up Yara and just start spewing things off.
Okay. Now, the transcript that you gave me, that's a true and correct copy of the recorded interview that you did with her on May 7th, 2018.
Yes, when she starts out talking about it all started in 2015, and she brings up Shane Valentine and the courtroom testimony with that you actually, which you actually is talking about when it starts out, is when she was handling a hearing on another judge's daughter. The judge was still a sitting judge, Michelle Levitt. Her daughter, according to the judge, Morgan Levitt, was a prostitute for Shane Valentine. There was two other girls who were alleged prostitutes for Shane Valentine, Dayona, and I can't remember her last name at the time, and Sophia Faraci. Okay? The judge told me that.
How do you spell that?
Sophia would be Sophia, Faraci, Faraci.
Is it Faraci or Saraci?
Faraci, it's with an F.
Okay.
Her father is, according to the judge, Vinnie Faraci, and I did corroborate that, who's a member, or was a known member of the Bonanno crime family. According to the judge, Morgan Levitt, who's Michelle Levitt's daughter, is Dayona, and I can't remember her last name off the top of the head.
Dayona?
Dayonna, Dayonna.
Okay.
And
so there's Faraci and Dayona.
And Morgan Levitt were supposedly all working for Shane Valentine.
And they were in front of...
Well, what happened was, before that hearing in front of the judge, Sophia Faraci dies in an automobile wreck out here in Las Vegas on Rainbow Boulevard somewhere. So she was not there. But the case that was in front of the judge was because this Dayonna had beat up Morgan Levitt. The judge told me, this is again from the top of my head, is that during this court hearing, when she was presiding over this
hearing... And this court hearing was in front of Judge Tobias-In.
In front of Judge Tobias-In. She said, 3 African-American males come into my courtroom. One of them stares down Morgan Levitt as she's testifying against Dayonna, who's the girl who beat Morgan Levitt up, supposedly by later on of how the orders of Shane Valentine. She says, I had the 3 guys expelled from the courthouse, and she says, I later found out that one of the guys that was staring Morgan Levitt was Shane Valentine. So Shane Valentine was the alleged pimp for these 3 girls, but Faraci couldn't testify because she had got killed in the accident at that time.
So Judge was very familiar with who Shane Valentine was.
Well, absolutely. She says right there, it starts out. She says it started out in 2015.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, during the interview also is, I don't know if it was the summer of 2015, is when Sarah Tobias-In Judge's daughter went to get a fake ID from Shane Valentine, correct?
I don't know if that was in 2015 or was that in the fall or around around December of 2016, because this was going on for a year from the judge. But there came a time when the judge told me, and it's in the interview, that Sarah had went over to Shane Valentine's house, and for the purpose of obtaining, I guess she was making counterfeit IDs. And during that encounter, according to the judge, Sarah sees drugs and guns in the house, and then at that time she says, meaning the judge, tells me during the interview that Shane Valentine told her daughter, that Sarah, that he wants her to work as a prostitute because she has a silver spoon in her mouth, which Judge Sarah Tobias-In basically just left and said she didn't want to do that. And that's why Judge said that she was upset with Shane Valentine.
Okay. Is there anything else that you feel you should place on a record reference Judge Tobias-In for a commission?
No, I could say, for me being a former criminal investigator, former police officer, my whole goal in writing these stories is to find out who committed the Land Kaufman murders. The problem that came up after I did the interview, when I started researching Land Kaufman murders and related back to what the judge said, when she says that the murders happened because she and her daughter were outed to Ty Bone, his daughter, and Ali left the house, put a text message, which was resulted in the murders, and she says Joe, and she even said that, meaning Sheriff Joe Lombardo doesn't want this coming out, because everybody knows that those murders happened as a result of them outing me, but it wasn't supposed to be Neo and Sidney being killed, it was supposed to be me and my daughter. She never related because I never had a chance to follow up on once the story came out because she broke off contact because she wanted us to delete things and we didn't delete anything from the story. So from an investigative standpoint, that is a mystery to me right now that I think needs to be cleared up. Is she needs to explain to somebody why she made that comment to me that the wrong two people got killed. Because do I believe what the judge said a lot in that story? She was telling the truth. Yes, I believe she did go to Vice and tell them that. Now, her tactics to me were disgrace, having put a daughter in there. And I believe she told your investigator in the transcript that I read from September, is that the reason why she didn't want to say daughter, because she still wanted the daughter provided with information. So she's like using her underage daughter in a club with criminals and pimps so she can give information to the police, which is, I can't fathom this, as a mother to do that, let alone a judge and a former prosecutor, to put your daughter in that environment just so you get information. So, but that's what happened. But I do believe the judge is telling the truth about going to the Vice cops and that they didn't do anything. I believe she did get outed, and the reason why I believe she got outed is because I found a text message that I was going through 2 months ago. I did a story on this, where Homicide Detective Mitchell Dosh tells Connie Land in a text that the judge indeed did get outed by Vice detectives. So we know now from another source, not Judge Tobias-In, from a cop, that Vice detectives did out Judge Tobias-In. So we know Judge Tobias-In is not lying about that. Everything else is speculation at this point, but I would have to think that it looks like the judge is telling the truth about a lot of the stuff, but her actions on a lot of stuff were just wrong. Specifically, what she did to Mrs. Land, to me, is just absolutely disgraceful. You got a grieving mother who just a couple of months before her daughter was murdered, and this woman, this judge, reaches out to her, tells her she's a judge, and then brainwashes her into thinking, Connie told her, I wrote these stories, the cops were following her, they had her under surveillance. Connie was like, having a nervous breakdown. Why would you do that to a woman for the purpose, looks like to me, of obtaining all the information Connie had on the murders? Now, that being said, at the time Judge Tobias-In did that interview with me, a year later, doing all these stories, and I don't have how to rephrase this the right way, because I said I believe what she's saying is the truth in a lot of this stuff. But was this stuff personal knowledge that the judge had now? Or was it information, like she said, she was getting from the police? She got text messages from Connie Land. She was talking to Ariane Zappia. She was supposed to talk to the FBI. And when I talked to her in May, because I didn't know Connie Land then before I did the interview, did she compile this in like one big, to make it look like there's like a major conspiracy, which there could be. Maybe there is a major corruption conspiracy or it's on the case. But how direct knowledge now does she have of all these events, or some of did it come from text messages from Connie Land, talking to Ariane Zappia, talking to somebody else, talking to cops, and she pieces it all together. I don't know. But at the time I did that interview because she wanted to get the story out, and she's a sitting judge. Why would I not believe, as an ex-cop and writing an investigative story, that a judge is going to talk to anybody, whether she believed it was off the record or on the record or not? Because you got to remember, in that interview on KLAS TV, she says right there on Channel 8, I was talking to everybody about this. She says I would go into a 7-Eleven and talk to the clerk. And we know she did because she's talked to the retired cop that I mentioned to you that gave me the text message. She wanted to get the story out.
And matter of fact, she was telling everybody that came in front of her to be a fine on a search warrant. She was telling them exactly what she was about her own quote-unquote investigation.
That's what she tells me in the interview. So, at this point, I'm looking at and there's other aspects of this because I've been doing stories about Metro for a couple of years. Metro obviously has some problems with some cops. Okay, I believe that. I believe there are some corrupt cops, and I believe a lot of stuff does get up Metro.
And that's just not Metro.
No, it's every police department in the country. But my thing that I have right now is, whether Allie Bowden was a prostitute, there's rumors her daughter may be a prostitute. I don't care about all that. I want to know what their involvement was with the murders, if anything, because that's what to me is very important. When she says the murders happened as a direct result of Justine Gaddis outing me, and Allie Bowden, and I possibly believe that she left the house at night, why wouldn't Sarah not go with her? Was how did she answer? Ask her, Judge, how did you know that Allie put this text message out?
Now, Doug, my last question is probably going to be this. As a sitting judge, okay, Judge Tobias-In, do you find it odd for her to interject herself in this kind of investigation?
Absolutely. Not only the judge interjecting herself in a murder, whether she believed her daughter's name may come up and some of it, which is wrong even there, but what I find absolutely horrendous also is if she's telling the truth, Judge Tobias-In, and Jared Grimmett was giving her this information, because she just didn't tell me that in the interview, but I provided the commission email message where she mentions Grimmett. I was getting information originally Grimmett. I can't understand that. I don't understand that. I talked to Connie Land the past couple of days, okay? And I don't know if she told you this, but she told me that the first time she met Jared Grimmett was with her husband wasn't until September of 2018, which was well over a year and a half after the murders. And she sat down with him and Mitchell Dosh. And she said to me that Grimmett admitted he was talking to the judge, but he didn't tell her what he was talking about. And I guess she told me the other day she had a conversation with Detective Dosh, and Detective Dosh told Connie Land that Jared's still talking to the judge, Jared Grimmett.
And this is recent.
This is just like a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know what's going on there. I know that I did a story last year where Connie filed a complaint with Internal Affairs against Grimmett. She wants him off the case because of the allegation judge. And I did the story on this, and they came back and told her that they did an IA investigation, which I don't think they did. And basically said he didn't violate any department rules. So that's bizarre to me. If indeed Jared Grimmett was giving information to the judge, if indeed that's true, then this murder investigation was compromised at that point. Then you have the judge in the middle of it. Then you have the judge trying to get Connie Land's information from the other homicide detective for God knows what reason, because I did that story that the FBI, and I published a letter, gave Connie Land, Richard Smith from the FBI, the agent, said, they're not investigating murders. Keep giving all the information to Metro Homicide. So we now have a 3-year-old unsolved homicide, and for being an ex-cop, I don't care who gets charged with this murder. This is going to be one hell of a ride come discovery process, no matter who gets arrested for this, because this investigation was compromised. Not only with that, I did these stories 2-3 weeks before the murders. Shane Valentine shoots into the occupied house of Neo Kaufman, the murder victim. Mother and grandmother's in there and some kids. Shoots into the house. I did the story. Metro police come They take the pieces of Shane Valentine's car because he rammed the garage door. They take the boulder, but they do not take the bullet that he fired that was lodged in the ceiling. And it's not only me as an ex-cop that, if this wasn't, this is sad, is that retired cops, detectives that I talk to, many of them, retired from Metro, that is absolute BS. Of course you take the freaking bullet, because what if you stopped, say, Shane Valentine with a gun in his car sometime later, and now you got a gun with no bullet, you just lost chain of custody. So what happened was, after the murders, Mitchell Dosh finds out about that shooting, and he goes back 2 months later, wherever it was, and retrieves the bullet out of the ceiling, just so they had a bullet, because I don't have the aspects of the homicide investigation. Red flag going up over there. Is that just negligence, incompetence, or is it something else? I don't know. But then it gets worse, because I did this story a couple months ago. I found a text message, because Connie gave me her text messages, and there's a lot of them. I'm sorting through stuff all the time as I get time. Mitchell Dorsch sent a text message in 2017 to Connie Land where he tells her so many things happened in this after the murders that were out of my control. Many things happened, well chronicled, basically that the investigation was screwed up, and now we're left to pick up the pieces. He never told her what these series of events were. So red flag number 2 goes up. What the hell's that about? And the most abhorrent thing that I've ever heard in my life, and I did this story about 2 months ago, I interviewed, well, you said I didn't interview him else. I did talk to Steve Land, okay, the father, and the husband of Connie Land. He says, because Sidney Land's name was on the lease, okay, so they're the only ones that can go into the apartment to get her stuff. A day or two, whatever it was, after the police clear the crime scene, the apartment, he goes into the same room, still bloodstained all over the wall and floor where his daughter was murdered, and he finds evidence left behind by the crime scene. And the evidence that he told me was a jar containing love letters from Neo's former girlfriend. For the life of me, that is something you would take, especially, she says, it was on the floor in the same room where Sidney was murdered. And then he found a pay stub with another guy's name on it from a company in Las Vegas that's not Neo Kaufman or everybody else. He says he picks the stuff up with some other stuff, and he meets Jared Grimm at a certain gives to him and says, this is evidence that you left behind, and Jared Grimm didn't say nothing. To me, I can't even see how something like that could happen. How would you leave something in a crime scene on a double murder and not take it out? You take everything. You're an ex-cop. The preservation of the crime scene is to get evidence, and you don't know what evidence is going to be important now in 6 months. So there's a lot of stuff that went on as this. That's, to me, the very least, it's incompetence and negligence. If there's something more than that, at this time, who knows?
Okay. All right, transcriber. We're going to end. The time is 2:36 p.m. Thank you. Awesome.
Before I close out this episode, a few closing comments. Judge Tobias-In made allegations and statements against numerous current and former law enforcement officers that are very disturbing. Tobias-In also engaged in conduct that, in my opinion, is at the very least unethical and at worst criminal. Tobias-In claimed that FBI Special Agent Kevin White told her that then Assistant Sheriff Todd Fasulo of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department had called his boss at the time, Assistant Special Agent in Charge Patrick Brodsky, and had Agent White stopped from talking to Tobias-In. If that indeed did happen, and Judge Tobias-In is telling the truth, then that is a major problem. An FBI superior telling an agent who was conducting an investigation into police corruption to cease talking to someone who was providing information to that same agent because someone from the same police department that was under investigation called an FBI superior and had the agent shut down. If true, this is Department of Justice Inspector General material. Todd Fasulo retired from the police department in 2017 and then went to work for Wynn Resorts in Las Vegas. I verified that after my interview with Tobias-In. Tobias-In was also correct when she said that Patrick Brodsky retired from the FBI and he too went to work for Wynn Resorts in May of 2018. Just to clarify what Judge Tobias-In said, Brodsky was not the head of the FBI Las Vegas division. He was number 2 under Special Agent in Charge Aaron Rouse. And that opens the door for the next question. If all this is true, was Rouse aware of this? I made telephone contact with Todd Fasulo last year while he was working at Wynn Resorts. All he said to me was that I was going down the rabbit hole, and he had no further comment. Patrick Brodsky never returned any of my calls. If true, then the integrity of the FBI Las Vegas division was compromised by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's number 3 person in charge at the time. And then again, that all opens the door for another question. Was Clark County Sheriff Joe Lombardo, who runs the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, aware of Todd Fasulo's actions with Patrick Brodsky? Did he order it? We don't know. Tobias-In is a sitting judge who took an oath to uphold the law. No matter what she thinks was going on with her daughter, Tobias-In admitted during my interview with me that she threatened a suspect and then kicked in the door to his residence. Why would she even be kicking in the door of a violent felon if she's worried about the safety of her daughter? Tobias-In used her position as a judge to influence Connie Land, a grieving mother whose daughter was murdered just a few months before. If Tobias-In was providing the information to the FBI that she obtained from Connie Land when she told Land that the FBI was investigating the murders, then why on January 16, 2019, did FBI Special Agent Richard Smith of the Las Vegas Division tell Connie Land in a letter just the opposite, that the FBI was not investigating the murders? Judge Tobias-In said that she was outed by Vice Detective Justine Gaddis. That is true. A September 20th, 2018 text message that I obtained that was sent by Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department Homicide Detective Mitchell Dorsch to Connie Land confirms that Judge Tobias-In was telling the truth about being outed by vice detectives. Dorsch's text says, quote, "That interview was done by vice detectives who outed the judge in the interview. We believe that's when the judge became furious with the department and her tone changed and she would not even allow us to interview her daughter." Detective Gaddis was later transferred to the Homicide Bureau, and I wrote a story about that last year. Now I got some new information. I recently became aware of information that appears to contradict what Judge Tobias-In told me as to why she believed that the Land Kaufman murders occurred. I will have that information on an upcoming podcast. Also upcoming, what is Judge Tobias-In's connection to a Las Vegas blogger whose character and integrity, in my opinion, is highly questionable? Thanks for listening, folks. Much more coming on future podcasts of Truth and Consequences with Doug Poppa. We'll have more on the Land Kaufman murders, more on Judge Tobias-In, and other topics. Thanks again for listening.